I'm so excited to have Elise here to tell us all about school contracting. This presentation is called School Contracting 101, and Elise is the perfect person to be talking about this. Elise and I actually had a coaching call about a week ago, and she was so helpful. And I was like, Elise, can you please come share this with our audience and at SLP Creative Con? And she graciously agreed to do so. So I'm so excited to have you back, Elise.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, here is our agenda for today. We're going to start with some introductions and backgrounds. Then we'll get into like school contracting 101. Then we'll talk about who's a good candidate for school contracting, the basic steps for contracting with a school, contracting with a school as a provider with subcontractors. So, starting to grow. And then we'll wrap up with some closing remarks. Elise, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Yeah, so I'm Elise. I own the Therapist Support Network. A little bit about my background as an SLP. I graduated from Missouri State University in 2013. I actually immediately went into SNF, but after several years, I ended up pregnant with my middle and realized SNF was not for me. I was very attracted to the summers off. But so what I ended up doing is I ended up working for a virtual staffing company with school districts. I moved up the ladder really quickly with that staffing company, and over that next like 6-year period, I found myself in the role of sales manager, clinical manager. Uh, I oversaw operations. I just did a lot of things for school staffing companies. So, in the midst of this, I really started to experience burnout and dissatisfaction. I ended up feeling like I just needed a break in entirety. I didn't want to work for staffing companies anymore. I was really discouraged by what providers were paid and the working environments, but I also could not afford to work for schools in Missouri. So I was like, whatever, I'm done. I'm done with schools. I ended up being approached by a district at a farm show, which is like the most Missouri story I have. I was at a farm show looking at tractors with my husband, and I I had on an SLP shirt, and it happened that a SPED director for a local rural school was there as well. And he saw me and he's like, "Are you a speech therapist?" I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, not many people know what SLP stands for, that, they're not in our industry." So he let me know his school was really struggling with finding SLPs. And I said, I cannot afford this Missouri SLP school salary, but are you open to contracting? And so we ended up talking in this like field of tractors for sale. And that was the start of my direct contract journey. Ever since then, I realized that it wasn't contracting with schools that I was burnt out from. It was contracting with schools using a quote middleman. So I founded the Therapist Support Network after direct contracting, and my goal was to provide affordable and accessible materials to SLPs, OTs, and PTs that want to work directly with schools. So, and when I'm not contracting or coaching, as you probably have learned in my ramble, I am spending time with my family. We have a little farm here in Missouri. We have cows. If you follow me, you know I love to garden. So, yeah, that's me.
I love that. I didn't know that you live on a farm. That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
such a good story. And I think it's a really good marketing tactic for anybody who's listening and wanting to grow their practice or do contracting to like wear your SLP shirt everywhere because you never know who's going to be watching and looking for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, really quickly, my name is Benita Litvak. I go by she, her. I have a passion for using AAC and literacy to support individuals with complex communication needs. I've had the opportunities to present at local and national conferences and co-author the Lou Knows What to Do book series published by Boys Town Press. Recently, I became an NLA trained clinician and have been able to more effectively support Gestalt language processors. And then when I'm not doing all the speechy things and conferences and interviews, I have recently taken up tennis lessons. Do you play tennis at all, Elise?
I do not. I'm not very coordinated. I think you have to be coordinated for tennis, don't you? Do you have to be
Well,
coordinated?
I'm not very coordinated either, but I feel like it's a really good challenge. If anybody here plays tennis, please let us know in the chat and if you live in Florida, definitely let me know. I'm looking for partners. But it's been really fun. And like I said, it's a nice challenge. And then I enjoy making specialty lattes at home. We got like the new Breville espresso maker, and it is so good and super quick and easy to clean. And then making some Cricut designs for family and friends. But that's the extent of it. It can be super stressful. The Cricut likes to break at the most inconvenient times. Does anybody Cricut? Please tell me that you can relate to this. You either love it or you absolutely hate it at times. So let's talk about our financial disclosure since this is approved for ASHA CEUs. Elise, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so my financial disclosures, I am the owner of the Therapist Support Network. I am also a member of ASHA.
Amazing. And I have ownership interest in Speechy Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC. I'm also an affiliate for Simple Practice and Meaningful Speech, and I receive commission for any sales with my code. And I'm also a member of ASHA. So here are the learning outcomes. Elise and I hope by the end of this pod course or presentation that you'll be able to define school contracting, identify the characteristics that make an individual suitable for contracting, list 3 basic steps involved in school contracting, and describe contracting with schools and delegating responsibilities. Here we go. All right, so let's start off with the basics. What exactly is school contracting?
Yeah, so like this definition by ASHA, and as an independent contractor, the SLP works under an agreement or contract with the school district or agency that contracts with the public school or charter school. Now, I will break it down specific to what I mean when I discuss contracting throughout this. So, if you follow me, you know that I often say work with schools, but not for them. So, when I talk about direct contracting, I am talking about a direct contractual relationship between the provider or the provider's private practice and the school district. So, sometimes what people visualize is what we're most familiar with in our agency when we think of contracting. Sometimes we think of a staffing agency and then the provider. So in this case, we're removing that staffing agency, or we're even becoming that staffing agency, and we contract directly with schools. Another thing to know when we discuss this and to, really wrap your mind around it is school contracting is not necessarily the same as being a school employee, where you essentially are given this caseload. If you're in a state with a cap, this caseload of 60, and you work with them. You really can specify what contracts look like for you. So for some people, it is a quote full-time type contract where you take on an entire caseload. But this also can be in a smaller capacity. So this is when businesses that specialize in like AAC, for example, or, that's their main service provision, they contract with schools to serve those specific populations. I see this a lot with bilingual evaluation and service provision as well, where contractors will specifically contract with schools for that specific population. So it doesn't always mean this is a 37.5 hour a week during the school year type of thing. It means it's any sort of contract in any sort of capacity between a provider and the school district. I also
Thank
discussed that this is a type of private practice. So I think in our industry, we're fairly familiar with the phrase private practice. So this is a type of business that an SLP OTPT can have.
Wonderful. Thank you for breaking Ash's definition down. I feel like you made it very clear. Like, really, it's taking out that middleman. If anybody has worked with a staffing agency to be a contracted SLP with a school, then once that middleman is removed, they're essentially doing what they did with the school. There's so many different ways to go about school contracting too. Like when you and I spoke, we explored all of the different options and kind of like what my needs were. And, it could be part-time, it could be full-time, it can be specialized, it can be general. And you have, I think we should just mention it here, you have your school contracting course and packet, right? Um,
Yeah.
And in there, you talk about those different avenues that people can go on? Okay.
I do. I do. I also have different contract templates because what I call like an on demand contract, which is if you're covering for maternity leave, I have several customers that all they do is just cover a series of maternity leaves in their area. Usually, if you're in a well populated area, that works well. If you have a lot of districts within so many, miles of you. So that contract looks a little bit different than if you are the full-time provider all year long, and those two contracts look different than if you are a virtual service provider. So there are just a few nuances if you are serving the schools in a certain type of way that you want to be mindful of. But yes, this can really look how you want it to look if you're able to find that ideal school for you.
That makes sense. If anybody is already school contracting or thinking about school contracting, can you just let us know in the chat so we have an idea of like who's actually interested in this? I feel like the interest has grown tremendously in the last year, right? Your Facebook group is a testament to that. A free Facebook group, by the way, if anybody's not part of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just this week, I think there were 300 people that joined. For those of
Wow.
you who aren't a part of it, it's SLP, OT, and PT school contractors. But yeah, the interest is really growing and it's exciting. It's exciting to see.
Yeah, it is. It is exciting because you're giving like power back to SLPs and helping them to advocate for themselves. So I know it's like a huge uphill battle and it can't like be done overnight, but this is like one step towards that, I think. So thanks
Yeah.
for what you're doing. I
Oh,
really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
So are we going to touch on, because I know people are probably thinking like, how do I find a school contract? Are we going to touch on that?
We are.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's talk about what makes a good candidate for school contracting.
Yeah. So I'll just go through these. And of course, this is, my thoughts based on my experiences in this industry and selling to schools and contracting with schools. So these are the things that I highly recommend. The first is school experience. Now, my caveat to this is if you're watching this and you have a private practice and you want to add on school services to your private practice offering, I have seen private practice owners just bring on providers who have school experience and they're fine. You just want the individual serving the school to have experience in whatever the contract reflects. So, like for me, I do not contract myself out for AAC services because that's not something I have experience in. There is a need in our area, but I'm just not a good candidate for that. So, a big thing is case management. A lot of my contracts are SLPA supervision and require a good amount of case management. That's something that I am very experienced in. So, I just really recommend that whatever contract that you pursue, whatever you want to outline, ensure that you have that experience. Because my next bullet point, no supervision required. So, you are an independent contractor if you choose this route. You are by IRS classification 1099 a business owner, which means that you are supposed to be able to work independently. So that's why I gave that first point is you are in order to be compliant with those IRS guidelines, and that's obviously, I mean, I'm not a CPA or anything like that. So I'm giving you the SLP version of this. But in order for you to serve as a 1099 business owner, you are not to have, these trainings from the school. And honestly, they will expect that you don't require that. So you want to ensure that you are able to run as independently as possible when you do execute a contract with a school. So I advocate that you require no supervision or no training, etc. Another thing that makes a good candidate is if you are someone who's willing to catch your own fish. I'll talk about this here in a bit, but a good amount of the people that I work with have contracts that kind of like me just fall into their lap, whether it's a school they used to work with or, someone at a farm show. But with that said, this really tailors itself to someone who is comfortable putting themselves out there. Get that fish, advocate for yourself, send marketing flyers. You aren't afraid to approach an individual or decision maker. I'll explain what that means here soon. And you're comfortable chasing your own dream. If you are someone who prefers, to be given a contract, I don't necessarily think that direct school contracting is for you. This does require you not only to chase your dream, but set your rate and really advocate for yourself. So this tailors to people who are willing to catch your own fish, but also advocate for yourself, set a rate for yourself, and engage in those conversations as comfortably as you can. This one isn't a requirement, but I really like this as for a candidate for school contracting. So I think school contracting pairs really well for people who have multiple revenue streams. School contracting pairs very well with private practice ownership. And the reason for that is one, if you have a pediatric private practice, oftentimes the school contract can step in and support during those ebbs and flows. So, like you peak in the summer, all of these random school age kids appear in your private practice, but then they go back to school and taper off, and you have a low period in September. That's when those school contracts can come in and help really balance out your revenue as a private practice owner. So, you don't have to have multiple revenue streams. I don't see private clients. So for me, school contracting was my main revenue stream. But just know that if you do have a private practice, this works really well with it.
That's great to know. I could definitely see why as well, especially if you want to see kids during school hours. Having a private practice can be a little bit tricky sometimes because kids tend to need to be seen once school is done. So if you have those contracts in place, at least you can go into the schools and see the kids during the day. So you mentioned that with a contractor that no training should be required. I'm just thinking as like an AAC advocate or AAC SLP, where we're talking about, getting the entire team on board for training. Where does this come into play? Like where the SLPs who's contracted with the school is not getting that specific training, let's say it's in Gestalt language processing or AAC or whatever else it may need to be for a particular client. Is that something that they should really be considering in their initial contract?
It is. And I have taken on continuing education because I've had a student on my caseload that does not, align. I actually had a contract that had a large amount of English language learners, and I am monolingual. So, one, I subcontracted out with a provider who was bilingual because I felt like I really needed that, and my students needed that. But two, I also, as a business owner, took on the education needed to serve those students. Um, so for the most part, you take on any sort of additional education. Now, I have had schools invite me to any continuing education. They provide all their SLPs. Um, it's really hit or miss with your district and what resources are available. But for the most part, if you do need some sort of continuing education to best serve that population, it falls on you as the business owner to ensure that you're, where you need to be clinically to ethically serve that population.
That makes sense. So let's say you're getting training. Is that billable hours or no?
It,
Okay.
it depends how your contract is written, but I typically don't bill for it. I don't put continuing education in my contract with the schools. I take that on as a business owner. You can try. Many schools will scratch it out though. I'll explain it here in a bit.
Mm.
But schools do have an attorney on site who will typically review the contract you send. And I will say attorneys tend to scratch out any sort of continuing education. Sometimes I try to wiggle materials in there, like I have access to the school materials. A lot of times attorneys scratch it out because, technically being 1099, but you can absolutely try to send that in your agreement. Once it's in the contract that's signed, you can then enforce it.
Okay. That makes sense. But this is, I think, really helpful for people to kind of decide like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. That sounds like what I want to do, or that just sounds like too much responsibility. I think I'll just kind of either stick with working for the district or, going working with the middleman. So obviously, when you are contracted with a school, the pay is higher. But with all of these requirements, like taking care of your own continuing ed, hiring out, let's say you don't hire out and you are just covering your materials and continuing ed and your drive time. And I'm trying to think of other expenses you might have, well, taxes,
Taxes.
insurance. Is it still like where you're more in the positive typically?
It is, yes. Now you do
Okay.
have to price yourself high. And one of the things that you'll see me like, I visibly am like, when I see it is when individuals who are new to contracting, who I haven't worked with yet, will ask or try to see what staffing companies are charging. And the reason I don't love this is because they have so many contracts that they can have lower overhead often. And also we all know what they pay providers, many of them. um
Yeah.
so you do have to price yourself competitively, and sometimes you look at that hourly rate and you think like, wow, that's a great rate. But then when you calculate, small business ownership taxes and like you mentioned some of the overhead, that really dips into that rate. So I highly recommend charging competitively to make this worth it, because if you don't, this is just another situation where you're underpaid for the work you provide. So yes, it's more for me, it's significantly more than what I'm significantly more than what I would make as an employee. And honestly, it's significantly more than what the staffing companies pay around here. But you do have to ensure that you've done your math before you throw that number out there. Because once taxes and everything's deducted, you could just get yourself in a bind where you're not making what you should be making.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you're bound by a contract at that point. So I find your group to be very helpful. Like there's pros and cons. Of course, people are sharing rates from like, bigger states versus smaller states. So that's something to be aware of. But I do think it's a good like stepping stone and getting like a general idea of what you should be considering when you're starting a contract.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know I shudder sometimes because here in the Midwest, we tend to direct contract for what California hires for. And so like, but yeah, it's good to know your worth, while also knowing kind of the market.
Do you find that like sometimes contractors run into trouble with IEPs that have certain requirements of like the SLP, maybe from a previous SLP who worked directly for the district, and then you have a contracted SLP coming in that can't actually perform those duties contractually? Like,
I haven't experienced that as much, although I'm interested if anyone else has, please share. I will say the thing that I've experienced the most, if I am speaking to like contractor pain points, and it really depends on the type of school that you're targeting, but rural districts, which are an amazing market for contractors. I really advocate for rural with starting out. But sometimes if there's been like a revolving door of contractors before you, my biggest pain point I've experienced where that school experience steps in is I've come in and I mean, sometimes half the population don't qualify anymore, but they're still on the caseload because so many providers have been in there, but not long enough to really initiate or feel comfortable initiating a dismissal. So that's been more of my pain point where that school experience comes in, and I've had to just say, this full-time contract is no longer full-time because all of these high schoolers with 60 minutes treating R, is no longer like relevant.
yeah, that makes sense. So like you're going in thinking you have a full-time contract and it doesn't end up being full-time.
Yes.
I
Yes. So
see.
that's
Okay.
been more of my pain point as a contractor. If I had to list them out, that would actually be more where that ethical obligation to ensure that we're giving services to those who truly qualify conflict a little with what I just outlined in the contract. And of course, ethics always reigns supreme.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would love to do like a pros and cons of like contracting.
Yeah.
This kind of gives some pros, but if we could do like a specific, like, here's the pros and here are the cons. Do you think there's a better place to talk about that, or should we do it now? What do you think?
We could absolutely, let's do it now.
Okay, perfect.
You want the cons?
Yeah, let's start with the cons.
I
You
think
got
the
excited
number,
about that.
let's discuss them. I think the number one con for me, and I try to always say in my marketing and or anywhere where you hear me speak, is that I of course am speaking of a place with of privilege. I do have health care through my partner. I think the number one con is really the lack of benefits. Again, in Missouri, if I calculate, of course, student loan forgiveness and healthcare and retirement, and I add it on to what SLPs make here, I still would be financially, it would be beneficial for me to contract, right? Because school-based SLPs, I mean, Missouri's the lowest teacher paying state. We're on the teacher
Wow.
pay scale. We're not on the teacher retirement scale. Like, it's a whole thing here. So for me, it's still financially advantageous, even if I didn't have my husband's insurance. However, in some of the states that are unionized, there is more advocacy where pay is higher. And so when you add in that healthcare, if you're motivated financially, it might not be the best fit. So one of the cons is just the lack of healthcare for small business owners, at least at this time. It's tough. The marketplace is tough. It's expensive, especially if you have dependents. So that's my number one con. My I think the other con is just the fact that it's a contract, technically it could drop. It could drop mid-year. And I won't say that I haven't had that happen. I have had contracts drop where they say, you know what? Hey, we had this in-person employee come in out of nowhere, and of course we're going to take the direct hire. I do advocate for protectual clauses in your contract to, limit the financial burden that comes with a contract dropping early. But that's another con, is you could be, without contract. That's why I really like multiple revenue streams. I will also give the caveat, while I'm speaking to cons, I mean, right now, I've always been able to find a replacement contract for one that I've lost. There's just a lot of schools, at least in my area, with a significant need. So it's a con, but I will say it's a con that never limited me financially.
Okay, so lack of benefits, it's a contract. So it sounds like if someone is really craving like security and yeah, security really, then it might not be the way to go.
Yeah.
But you do become a business owner when you become a contractor, and there is risk of being a business owner. Whereas when you're an employee, there's a somewhat a sense of security, but nothing is guaranteed with that either.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good point. So those are the big cons that I've experienced. I do
It's
talk
only
about,
2. It's not
well,
that bad. You're like, "Wait, there's
I
more."
mean, okay, you're also working with schools, so there's
Yeah,
that.
that's true.
You are still at the mercy of whatever your governing body in that state is when it comes to qualifying. Like, I can't get rid of that. I mean, there's still that school component. So that might be a con to someone who,
Coming from private practice or something.
yep,
Yeah,
yep, you're still working with schools here.
that makes sense. So what are the pros?
I really like flexibility. So for me, and it's so funny because every year I change it. So if you followed me last school year, you know that Fridays were my days that they're my no contract days. This year, Tuesdays and Fridays are my no contract days. So you do have flexibility to really create your schedule. And that, to me, that is the number one, being able to earn a good living but still having Fridays to get your life done. That's I can't say enough how much of a pro that is. You also have control. So for me in my state, we don't, or the states, a lot of the states that I've sold to don't have caseload caps. Indiana, for example. So Indiana is known for the high caseloads, in my experience with schools. But with a contract, you're able to insert that control if you're in a state that doesn't have those outlined for you already. So not to exceed a caseload of this. So you have control a bit. You can say no. You can outline what you're going to do as a contractor. You cannot put lunch duty in there. So flexibility, control over your job, your profession. And then of course the other pro is you set your rate. Um you can set a rate that feels fair to you. I don't know anywhere else, for me personally, in my location, where I would get the rate that I'm charging right now, any other environment. So setting a rate that you're proud of, that makes this worth it, is another pro.
So you have more pros than cons, clearly. But I think if anybody's listening to this, that caseload cap is a huge one, especially for the states that don't have them. I feel like almost if you're in a state that doesn't have a caseload cap, this is probably the route to go because you can do it, but I feel like everybody just gets burnt out in the end anyways. And then we see SLPs wanting to leave the field. It's like you don't have to leave the field. There's other options. So I'm so glad that we're here talking about school contracting as another option. So SLPs can, stay in the field, do what they love, but have more control and flexibility in their job.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, so let's move on. What are the basic steps for contracting with a school?
All right. So I broke it down into sell, contract, execute. So let's talk about selling. So there's a few different ways that you sell to schools. Some states, specifically like Arizona, New Jersey, Texas uses this a little bit, but Texas kind of does a weird thing. They use a process called a bid process. Um, that is not every state, but it's so funny because that's the thing that I hear the most is how do I win a bid? But they're people who are in Kansas, and Kansas doesn't heavily utilize bids. So it's weird because I found a lot of people have heard bid and RFPs, but don't realize that that's not the only way to get a school contract. It's actually the less common way. So I'll start by emailing, calling, or we'll just call it cold outreach. This is essentially finding a decision maker and reaching out to them and saying, I am Elise. I contract directly with school districts. I am accepting contracts for the 24-25 school year. How are you guys doing with your recruitment? Do you envision having a speech therapy need? So it's engaging in that conversation with a decision maker. In most states, the decision maker is the special education director or whatever title your state uses. Some states use different titles, but that's the person that you will speak to. So it's doing that cold outreach and putting yourself out there. That is the number one step. Sometimes they will send you to a bid process. It's a whole other topic for a whole other day. But essentially it's being allowed, you're sent to a place where you have to submit a series of documents that allows you to do business with that district. So I would say if everyone's like, hey, I want a school contract, where do I start? I always send people to engaging in conversations with the school.
So getting like a list of schools or like the districts in your area that you're willing to, let's say, travel to first, like we could talk about virtual second, but getting a list, finding out who like the ESC or the SPED director is, and then like reaching out to them. And then your packet has templates to send out, like if people like just listening to this even more, I think I'm going to go get it because I don't want to start anything from scratch. But that's like what you're saying, right? And when we had our call too, you had talked about like finding places that are in a need for SLPs. So can you describe that as well?
Yeah, so I searched the job boards. I have found, and I have been doing school sales for, I think this is like year 8 that I have engaged in school sales. And job boards are still number one for me. And And not that you apply for those jobs, but that shows you the schools that are still struggling to recruit. Now, that works better the closer you get to the school year. Like now, or in the spring, let's say in February, March. In those circumstances, they might not have things posted yet. And so you can just reach out to your target schools. But the closer you get to the school year, the more reliable job boards will be. And you'll see that, Springfield, Missouri School District is still hiring. So when I see that, what I do is I find that decision maker, which is the SPED director, and I call them, and that's when I let them know, like, hey, I heard you guys are still hiring. I always engage in a formal conversation. I like do not visualize car salesman. It's just, hey, I'm an SLP. I saw you guys are struggling. I contract with schools. Do you need help? And so that's typically, I do phone calls. I have had people that have stayed in email and been completely successful. With that said, decision makers are bombarded with sales emails from large staffing companies. I mean, and we think about it. If I'm sure anyone here can think of a time they've been spammed via email for sales. Um, so you tend to get ignored. Not always. Every now and then you get through, but I've had much more success on the phone and engaging in that conversation.
Do you have a template for phone calls?
I
Oh,
do.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
phone calls and emails. Because I do have some people that I coach that the idea of getting them on the phone stops them. And I tell people, if something's stopping you, we have to find a way around it. You're not going, if you cannot you know, do this first thing in the morning, and I treat myself like a dog. I have a chocolate after, like it's,
I do
after
the
I make
same thing, reward yourself, yeah.
I mean, I don't think they recommend it, but whatever. After 5 calls, I eat my little Dove dark chocolate. Um, so, if that doesn't motivate you, I do say, like, find the way that will keep you in momentum. So it's not impossible via email, but yes, so I do have scripts for both. I have flyers in there. I will say the number one source still, when I poll the Facebook group, if you're in that Facebook group, you see that I do these polls, and it's really just for my knowledge. So I stay up to date. So I ensure that what I am experiencing is what everyone else is experiencing. The number one most common source is still word of mouth. It is still like putting yourself out there, letting your SLP friends know, like, hey, I'm contracting with schools, and getting that friend that's like, actually, you know what? We just have 3 slippas. I can't supervise them all. Let me connect you with a SPED director. So that, and a school you used to work for, that still, those connections still reign supreme in getting school contracts. If you're a private practice owner, I have one customer who's a private practice owner, and the mom of one of her clients is an English teacher in their school. So, letting people know you serve schools works really well.
Okay, that's a great tip. This is like a little off topic, but I just had a thought. This is actually probably going back to the last slide. Like space. We know that that's a common issue for SLPs, like getting adequate space to see clients. Is that something you put into the contract?
It is
Okay.
not just my in-person contract, but my virtual contract, like outlining my expectations of the school. The students have to be somewhere quiet. I put it all in there. If it's anything that you never want to deviate from, right? Like your hard stops, um, absolutely put it in the contract. The school is responsible for providing a private area adequate for therapy services.
Okay. That's something I think that SLPs who work for staffing agencies like should they're like, antenna should be going up on that because I don't think that staffing agencies do a good job of helping SLPs, but I guarantee it's probably in the contract, right? Like probably something about having a safe space, a dedicated space for SLPs. No?
I don't know. Some staffing
Okay.
company contracts, I question if any. I
Okay.
question what's in there, but we should continue to advocate for it as providers and ask those questions, because you're right. And this is where I do tell people, if they're like, direct contract isn't for me, I really encourage them to find a staffing company that is provider owned, or a private practice clinic in your area that also serves schools, because I argue that providers are the best people to engage in contracts because we know what to put in the contract. So the
Mhm.
staffing company should have it in there. Do I think that the some that are like medical in nature but took on like, I don't know. I'm
Okay.
not sure, but we should keep advocating for it and asking the questions, because that's what's going to make contracting not an inferior service to school districts. That's what's going to make it to where, okay, I can't find an employee, I will pursue contracting, and it's not like this inferior offering our school. It will help shed light on the benefits of contracting for school districts.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned something I think we should like expand on it a little bit more. There's the provider owned contracting agencies, but you said medical staffing agencies. So they're like hiring what, like nurses?
Yes. So the staffing agencies, if you follow my page, you'll see that I advocate for provider owned, because some staffing agencies, one, are medical in nature, and they just added on schools. Like, they used to staff SNFs, and they
Okay.
added on schools because they saw, I mean, it is profitable. But there may or may not be someone who knows school service provision there. You might be stuck, I don't know the nice word, with a recruiter who normally staffs nurses in a nursing home, and so, one, medical agencies; two, another trend with staffing companies, particularly virtual staffing companies, is that they're investor owned, or investor backed. So with these companies in particular, there's oftentimes turnover with managers. If investors get in and don't like the profit margins, they'll make recommendations for turnover. These companies tend to have lower pay rates because they do have so many individuals they're reporting to financially. It's big in the virtual space, the investor backed companies. So medical investor backed are the big ones that I tend to see, with staffing companies. Also technology backed. That's another one that's big in the virtual companies, where a company that is trying to make a virtual platform will staff out providers. Again, you just want to ensure, if you are subcontracting with a middleman, you just want to ensure that there's someone there to support you that knows therapy. If there's not, I argue, why have the middleman? Why give them part of your rate? Because you're not well supported, you know? So
Right.
that's
Yeah,
my,
that makes sense.
I could talk about that for days.
So like if you had a choice, just you, Elise, like the choice between contracting with a staffing agency or working directly for a school, what would you pick?
Like, as an employee,
Mhm.
would the staffing agency be provider run?
Oh, okay, good. Not provider run.
Oh, oh. So oh man, I think I would pick employee.
Okay, that's good. I think it's good for people to like know, And then if it was provider run, provider, you would go
Oh,
that
for
route.
sure. For sure.
Okay.
I'd work for like a clinic that does it, yeah, that would be
Okay.
good like that.
Okay. That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
All right. So did we get to number 2 yet? I don't think
we
so.
have
I
not.
sidetracked you a little bit.
That's fine. So you sell to a district, you pitch yourself, they say like, yeah, wow, this sounds great. We are struggling to recruit, or we have used this staffing company and they can never find anyone to fill the contract, this. So what you do is then you meet with the school and you get in those contractual discussions. So that brings up our next point, which is contract. Um, this is where you negotiate your rate. In some states like Texas, Florida does this a little bit, your northeastern states, you become a vendor. It's not a horrible process, but it is something you're required to do business with the school. So it's like your business, your liability insurance, your business document, your W-9, blah, blah, blah. So you negotiate your rate. If applicable, you become a vendor. You also, this is where you engage in those contract discussions and you send your contract. I argue you send your contract. Every now and then a school will send you their contract to sign. But you send your contract to the school with, this is what it looks like. This is my caseload cap. These are my billable services. And you send that to the school for them to sign. It typically then is sent to a board and the board signs it. So when I talk a lot, because a lot of times people are like, wait, I can't call a school until I have my liability insurance and this is a long process, usually not horrendously long in some cases, but typically a board has to sign your contract. So usually you're at the mercy of the next board meeting to get the contract signed. So you have a minute to get everything in order before you start seeing students. Usually, every now and then you will experience one with an expedited process, but for the most part, it's not a very quick process. You have time to get all your things in order, get your materials, etc.
Okay. That is really good to know. Um, I know somebody here is thinking, okay, what should the rate be? What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you share a lot about that in your group.
It's so hard because it does vary per region. I think if I came at Missouri schools with a California rate, they would likely fall over. So it does depend on your region. I mean, of course, I want you to charge your worth, but schools, if it's too high, schools will turn you away. With that said, you can get, I mean, SPED directors have a budget. And so they will try to say, "Oh, that's too expensive." So you have to know your market area. Um, I will say when determining your rate, one thing I see, especially with those that have private practice, is they'll say their private practice rate. But something is usually with school contracts, you bill per hour. And so you bill for indirect rate. So your school rate might actually look lower than your private practice rate, but you bill for that indirect time. So it ends up being very similar. I say I don't know, whatever rate you're thinking. Everyone grab a pen and paper and I'll give you like a general formula to play with it. Take a random rate that you're thinking. Okay, I'm gonna have to write it down because I am
Or
so
they
bad
could put
at
it in the chat too, like rates that you've seen maybe in your area, like whether
yeah,
it's through a staffing agency or what you've heard. Write it
yeah.
down, but also like throw them in the chat and then put your state or area.
I say state because like if
Okay.
you're in Florida, actually if you're in Florida, don't depress us. No, I'm kidding.
I'll give you
Um
our rate for Florida. I'll let you know if you want.
Florida is hands down lowest paying as of right now.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully no other state is competing with that. So if you want to play with what you think this will bring in, I would take your rate times hours per week. A full-time school contract is typically about 37 hours per week because of course you're not paid for breaks. And take that times weeks per year. Most school contracts are about 36 to 37 weeks. So rate times hours per week times weeks per year, which is usually about 36, 37. Play around with that. That's going to give you your gross. So if you're coming in, let's say, we'll just throw a number out there, $100 an hour times 37 hours per week, or sorry, yeah, 37 hours per week times, we'll say 36 weeks in the school year. I like to err on the side of caution. You do typically bill before school starts, but I like to just, undershoot and surprise myself. So 100 times 37 hours per week times 36 weeks a year. I have a calculator on me because I'm really bad at math, would be $133,200 gross. So play around with those numbers and find something that makes sense for you. That's gross. So you will want to ensure that you then deduct good old taxes,
Mhm.
minus ASHA fees if you do keep those, license costs, etc. Those sort of costs that come with being a business owner.
Yeah, like 30% for operating expenses, 15% for taxes, 15 to 20 for taxes, right?
Yeah.
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 About 50%.
Yeah, which my operating expenses aren't horrible.
Okay.
Yeah, it just really, I think it depends on what it looks like for you. Like I put drive time and mileage in my contract, so I get paid for those when I do staff on site. So yeah, I play around with those numbers and let that guide your rate. If you start to get a lot of schools that are like, "Ooh, we would never afford." I mean, if you get a really outlandish response, you can always adjust. I typically tell them my rate before I send them my contract so we can kind of have a back and forth if needed.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Should they be looking to any sources for determining their rate too?
So you can look at school board. It involves a deep dive and you have to be good friends with Google, but you can look at past school board minutes and try to find what they've paid in the past. Honestly, I've asked SPED directors. I've said, "Listen, I am trying to like gauge your market. What do you typically pay?" With that said, I will say, large staffing company presence often drives the rate down, right? That market becomes saturated. But if you have a school that's saying, I mean, we used this staffing company, but they never had the people for it, providers always left, I would charge higher and let the school know, like, I am trying to have a competitive rate. So I can then, if I want to hire this out, I can pay providers well and hopefully keep them at your district. So don't always let what a school has paid guide you. But if a school's paid $75 an hour for 10 years, if you go in at 120, they might jump. They might not. I sent a contract to a friend because I was not the right fit for the school. It was not the right fit for where I'm at in my life. And I knew a friend was looking for contracts in the state. So I just said, hey, I'm going to introduce you to. She went in $25 an hour more than I did and got the contract. So, and this is what I do for a living. So just, you know, if schools need you, if they see your value, they will go higher, but also you do want to ensure that you're semi within the market. And I know that's really ambiguous. That's the hard thing about nationwide discussions is because every state's just different with rate.
No, that makes sense. I think that anybody who's aware of like the climate and it depends on socioeconomic status. Schools are driven by the taxes within that area, right? The funding that they get from that area. So it would make sense that it varies depending on where you're at.
Yeah, it's
And like you
surprising.
mentioned, the staffing agencies driving it down.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say. People always, or I found a lot of my customers assume rural pays less, but urban typically pays less because staffing companies really flock to your larger districts. And so that's just something to be mindful of. Which is kind of reverse of being an employee. I know around here, rural schools pay employees less, but they pay contractors more than the inner city schools do.
Interesting. That's so interesting. All right, so let's talk about step 3.
Yeah, so once you've got that contract signed, I mean, you execute, you onboard the district, you get your caseload, you make your schedule. I put in my contracts that I bill for all of that. And you serve as their provider. You provide those services, you bill for everything you do, or you should. I advocate that you should. No free service provision. And then you invoice once a month. It's outlined in your contract when you invoice. I invoice by the 5th, and I get paid after the board meeting. So, with most of my schools, the board meeting's usually done the week of the 15th, and I get that paycheck by the end of the month. And that's that. I mean, once that contract is signed, it becomes quite natural to just step in and be the provider. You just don't do lunch duty.
Awesome. Okay, so can a provider contract with schools and then hire out? You've kind of alluded to that quite a bit now. So what does it actually look like?
Yeah, so I'll be brief with this because there are a good amount of state variances with, especially with tax classification, but you can absolutely become a staffing quote unquote agency. So you sell the same way you did. You just represent yourself as my business. I am so and so, I own so and so speech therapy. We are accepting contracts. So you speak as yourself as a business owner, um, but you sell the same way. For step two, you contract, but the contract is between your business and the school. In your contracts, in all of my contracts, there's a subclause that allows you to hire or subcontract out. So you execute the contract as normal. But step three is where you see the variation. So you onboard the school, you get that caseload, but you send it to your provider. They bill you, you bill the school, you keep the overhead, you pay your provider. That's very much simplifying how to staff out school contracts.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's almost like going into your contract, just like if you want to grow, and like that's the only way you'll be able to scale a business is by hiring out, because you can only do so many hours, just kind of going into it with the thought that you will eventually like be hiring out, right?
Absolutely. And I argue if you are in your first contract, I have a lot of customers this year. This is why my staffing packet came about, because I had so many people that got my contractor packet and a few months later are like, they have additional needs. I need to hire. And so that's where the staffing packet was born. But really setting up a contract that allows you to subcontract and hire if needed is crucial, because you will find, and I mean, anyone who's contracting will say there will be a time in your contracting career where you have to say no to taking on more, or you have to hire out and take on more. You will be at that crossroads. And sometimes it comes within a few months of your first contract. So I always say contract today with tomorrow in mind. And if you do want to hire, ensure that your contract sets you up to be able to hire if you need to. So your rate is high enough. If you want to pay a provider mileage, you're charging mileage, etc.
That's super helpful. I hope that anybody who's watching this and they're new to school contracting is going to be able to start like completely on the right foot just with all of this information. Because I see sometimes in your group, and you kind of mentioned this, where like somebody got into a contract and they're like, whoa, like this happened. And I feel really bad. And that actually kind of turned me away a little bit. And then once I like was considering what I actually needed as like a mom and an SLP, and how I really do need those school hours, I like revisited school contracting again, and you helped like kind of clarify some big questions that I had about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are, you can easily get yourself in a situation where you're like, no, never mind. Like I had a virtual contract once where they did not uphold their facilitator and my needs for a facilitator, and it felt unethical. And so I ended up I have termination clauses in all of my agreement for that, all of my contracts for that reason. So I ended up giving that 30-day termination, and I supported them with finding an on-site provider. Um, so, really protecting yourself just in case. But I will say those like scary stories that for some reason the Facebook algorithm really boosts.
I
I'm like,
know.
really? We had like 10 people who are celebrating, but let's all like
Yeah.
stare at this horror story. Yes, that those are few and far between, and a good contract will protect you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely having like a good contract and taking this serious, like it's a contract, like you have to take it very seriously. Everything is in writing, it's legally bound. So, yeah, I think taking the time to learn like what should be included in the school contract and what are some good things to not leave out is probably worth like anybody's time who's considering school contracting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been so helpful, Elise. We are going to have you back on for our panel discussion. So, all of the questions people have about school contracting can get answered then, and we'll be able to kind of bounce ideas off some of the other speakers as well. But if people are looking to learn more about you or connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my website's thetherapistsupportnetwork.com. I do have a free checklist on there. If you just want to see like the basic steps, I'm a very visual person, so that helped me. So that's why I made it available. And then I'm really big on Instagram. You can always email me the SLP OTPT school contractor group as well. I'm in there probably way too much, but I just can't help myself. So yeah, and I love talking if you can't tell. So message me, email me anytime.
Amazing. And there is our social media handles for Tassel as well as the website and email if you have any questions. Thank you so much, Elise. This has been incredible and eye-opening, I think, for a lot of people.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.